Thanks for joining the webinar series on Ruby on Rails. Today is the last topic on Ruby language itself. Today we are going to cover Ruby meta-programming. Meta-programming is a very important feature of Ruby language. So let's start with the presentation. So these are the topics that we are going to cover. We will look into what is and why meta-programming, and we will see how Ruby language enables itself becoming a great meta-programming language. And then we will see some of the meta-programming features of Ruby language, such as respond to, send, dynamic typing, sometimes called the duck typing, and missing method and define method. So let's start with what is and why meta-programming. You can think of meta-programming is writing programs that write or manipulate other programs. Okay? So that's the reason it's called the meta-programming, because it's not really dealing with the data, but it's dealing with a programming language itself. So the reason meta-programming is very useful is because it can provide a higher level abstraction of your logic. So it's easier to write code and it's easier to write read code. For example, we haven't learned the Rails yet. In Rails, you can use a find by name, and this name happens to be one of the field of your model, or find by name and hobby. So these name and hobby, you can use this kind of method right in Rails, and this kind of a new method can be created during runtime. So that's actually one of the great feature of Ruby language, enabling you to create the new method during runtime based on, in this case, the names of your column, the column names of your model. Some of the Ruby language characteristics that make it really great meta-programming languages. First, these are the characteristics of Ruby language that make it the great meta-programming language. Classes are open. Class definitions are executable code. Every method call has a receiver, so you will see later on, whenever you call a method, in fact, there is an object that receives the method. And class is an object. So let's take a look at each of these in a bit more detail. Classes are open. So unlike in Java and C++, in Ruby, you can actually add a new method to the existing built-in classes, such as a string and fixed num during runtime. So here, suppose if you want to add encrypt method to the string class, all you have to do is just define a new method for that particular class. And then when you call cat, this is using the, this is basically the display cat. However, you can also actually you can use encrypt method that you just have added. So you're basically adding this method to the string class. Class is open, so meaning you can add new methods to the class, even for the built-in classes like a string and fixed num. So application can be written in higher level abstraction. So you don't have to do a lot of work to actually do some encryption on a string object by just adding encrypt method. More readable code and less coding. So in Rails, Rails really take advantage of this malleable class definition. So one can open up Rails classes and add new features to them, and Rails integration testing is a great example. Class definitions are in fact executable code. So basically, in fact, the class method, when you use the class, this is in fact the method of class. Okay? So here, when you do have this kind of code, basically, class method of class object gets called. Okay, and this is the name of the class, and this is in fact the executable code. So depending on whether in this case, whether debug environment variable is set or not, the log method is defined differently. Okay, so this is happening during runtime, meaning the class object gets created during runtime, and the log method is defined differently during runtime. So this is something that you cannot do in Java. Class is an object, so in this case, when I'm actually defining a class, person class, and if you try to display a class of that person, by the way, self means the current object. So current object in this case is the person class object, and person class object class is class. Okay. All right, so let's do our first the demo. So exercise 0. So extend the built-in class. So this is a case that we are extending string class with encrypt method. Okay, and then you can call the encrypt method like this. Okay, so let's try that. Classes open. Okay, so let's run this. Okay, so cat, and then it's going to display something else. Okay, so if I say cat2, then it's now it's just using encrypt method. So it's using translate the method to translate A to B and Z to A and things like that. All right, so that basically shows that classes are any classes, including built-in classes, can be extended. Another aspect we learned is that class definitions are executable code. So again, this is the same code that we have seen in the slide. So we are defining logger class, and depending on whether environment variable of debug is defined or not, we are defining log method differently. Okay, so in this case, log method is going to actually display some log message, and in this case, log message is not going to actually display anything. Okay. All right, so we're going to run this code at the command line. So I'm going to just open here. All right, so I was playing around with this one. So right now the debug has not been set. Okay, so if I run this code, it's not going to display anything. Okay, meaning the calling a log message is going to actually use this log method, which doesn't do anything. Okay. Now we are going to define a debug environment variable. Okay. Now we're going to actually run that code. And now you can see it's displaying log message because it's now using log method defined here. Okay. All right. So you can now think of the class is in fact class is in fact the method that is being executed. All right, yeah. So this is a way that we can find out, in fact, the class is in fact the method of class. Okay, so let's try this. And we're going to display class method, and we're going to sort. And you can see we have class method there. Okay, and we can actually use these things whether class method is in fact defined in the class. Okay, so we can just try this, and it should return true. All right. Class is an object, so as we have seen before, so the self means current object. So if I run this one, class is object. Okay, so if I run this one, I'm displaying a current object, happen to be person class object. And if I want to see what is the class of the person class object, is supposed to be class. Okay. Class. All right, moving forward. Introspection, just like in Java, you can find a lot of information about an object. You can find out the class of that object. You can find all the methods of that class of the object, meaning the class of that object. You can find out the parent class. You can find all the ancestors. You can find out all the private methods and public methods and things like that. Okay, we are going to actually move on to some of the more frequently used meta-programming features of Ruby programming language. So let's start with the response to. Okay, so response to is a method of class object. And it returns true if object responds to a given method. In other words, if the class of that object has a given method. Okay, so suppose we define a class called hello in this case, and it has a method of my hello method. Okay, so now we create